A son abandoned his father in a condemned, rotting house thinking he was a worthless burden. But what the old man found hidden in the basement was worth $1.90 million. The karma is perfect. Before I reveal this true story from Portland where greed met the most satisfying justice, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you believe that what you throw away might be worth more than you think, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because when you discover what the worthless father was sitting on, and what he did to his son after being rescued, you'll understand why this is perfect karma. Marcus Chin, 42 years old, sat in his Mercedes outside the condemned house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The house, if you could still call it that, was a disaster. Roof caving in, windows boarded up, walls covered in graffiti, surrounded by overgrown weeds and trash. It had been his childhood home. Now it was a rotting shell. In the passenger seat sat his father, Richard Chen, 78 years old, clutching a worn duffel bag with his few belongings. "Marcus, why are we here?" Richard asked, confusion evident in his voice. His mind wasn't what it used to be. Early-stage dementia had been creeping in over the past 2 years. "This is where you'll be staying for a while, Dad," Marcus said, unable to meet his father's eyes. "But the house is falling apart. We sold this place years ago, didn't we?" "We did. But the buyer abandoned it. The city condemned it. No one lives here anymore." "Then why?" "Because I can't take care of you anymore," Marcus said bluntly, his guilt manifesting as anger. "I have my own family. My own problems. You need to figure something out." The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus hadn't always been this cold. There was a time when he'd loved his father deeply. Richard had been a good dad, worked 2 jobs to support Marcus and his sister after their mother died of cancer when Marcus was 12. Richard had sacrificed everything to give his kids opportunities. And for years, Marcus had been grateful. He'd gone to college, become a software engineer, built a successful career, married his college sweetheart Jennifer, had 2 kids. But then Richard had gotten sick. First it was the diabetes, then the heart issues, then the dementia diagnosis. He'd needed more and more help. Marcus's sister lived in New York and barely called. The responsibility fell entirely on Marcus. For 3 years, Marcus had juggled it all: his demanding tech job, his own family, and caring for his increasingly dependent father. It had been exhausting. His marriage was strained. His kids barely saw him. His career had stalled. 6 months ago, Jennifer had given him an ultimatum: "It's me and the kids, or it's your father. I can't do this anymore. He needs professional care." Assisted living costs $6,000 a month, Marcus had said. "We can't afford that." "Then find another solution." "But Marcus, I'm serious. If this continues, I'm taking the kids and leaving." Marcus had tried. Applied for Medicaid, denied. Richard had too many assets. Looked into cheaper facilities, they were nightmares. Asked his sister for help, she refused. And then he'd thought of the old house. The house had been Richard's pride and joy once. He'd bought it in 1985 for $45,000, raised his kids there, poured his heart into it. When the neighborhood declined in the 2000s, Richard had held on, refusing to sell even as everyone else left. Finally, in 2015, he'd sold it for $180,000 to a developer who promised to renovate. But the developer had gone bankrupt, abandoned the project, and the house had sat empty for years, deteriorating. Now it was a condemned property. The city was planning to demolish it next year. But for now, it was empty, abandoned, and technically still had running water, though the electricity had been cut off years ago. It's only temporary, Marcus told himself. Just until I figure something else out. But deep down, Marcus knew the truth. He was abandoning his father in a condemned house because it was easier than dealing with him. Come on, Dad. Let's get you settled. Marcus helped Richard out of the car and walked him to the front door, which hung off its hinges. Inside was worse. Water damage everywhere, holes in the walls, garbage from squatters, the smell of mold and decay. Marcus, I can't live here, Richard said, his voice trembling. This place isn't safe. It's just for a little while. I brought you supplies. Marcus carried in the bags, some canned food, bottled water, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, Richard's medications. He set everything in what used to be the living room, now just an empty space with stained carpet and broken furniture. There's no electricity, Richard observed. No heat. Winter is coming. You have the sleeping bag. And I'll come back to check on you. When? Soon. Marcus, please. I'm your father. I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to send you to college. How can you leave me in this place? Marcus felt the guilt crushing him, but he pushed it down, burying it under resentment and self-justification. You have dementia, Dad. You're barely working anymore. I can't keep sacrificing my life for yours. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your life. I'm asking you not to abandon me in a condemned house like trash. I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you a place to stay. This isn't a place to stay. It's a death sentence. They stared at each other, father and son, the gap between them now unbridgeable. I have to go, Marcus said. Jennifer and the kids are waiting. He turned to leave. Richard grabbed his arm. Marcus, please. Don't do this. I'm your father. Marcus pulled away. You were my father. Now you're just a burden I can't carry anymore. The words were cruel. Designed to hurt. To make leaving easier. Marcus walked out, got in his Mercedes, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, he saw his father standing in the doorway of the dilapidated house, small and frail, watching his son abandon him. Marcus told himself it was necessary, temporary, that he'd come back soon with a better plan. But he knew it was a lie. Richard stood in the doorway until the Mercedes disappeared. Then he walked back inside and looked around at the ruins of his former home. This was the house where he'd brought his wife after they married. Where his children had been born. Where he'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases. Where he'd cried when his wife died. And now it was his prison. He sat down on the dirty floor, opened his duffel bag, and found a photo he'd tucked inside, his family from 1995. Richard and his late wife Susan, young Marcus and his sister Rachel, all smiling. What happened to us? Richard whispered to the photo. The house creaked around him. Rain had started to fall, leaking through holes in the roof. Richard pulled the sleeping bag around himself and closed his eyes, wondering if he would survive the night. What he didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that this abandoned, dilapidated house was hiding something. Something that had been there for decades. Something worth more than either of them could imagine. And in 3 days, when Richard found it, everything would change. Not just for him, but for Marcus too. Because sometimes, When you abandon something, you lose more than you think. And sometimes, what looks worthless holds priceless value. The house was about to give up its secret. And neither Richard nor Marcus would ever be the same again. The first night in the condemned house was brutal for Richard. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Rain poured through multiple holes in the roof. Richard huddled in his sleeping bag in the driest corner he could find, shivering, listening to rats scurrying in the walls. His medications were in his bag, but he'd forgotten to take them earlier. His memory was spotty these days. He made a mental note to take them in the morning. He couldn't sleep. The cold, the fear, the crushing loneliness kept him awake. How did it come to this? He thought. I worked my whole life, raised good kids, and this is how it ends. Abandoned in a condemned house. But Richard Chen hadn't survived 78 years, including poverty, discrimination, the death of his wife, and raising 2 kids alone, by giving up easily. When dawn finally came, Richard assessed his situation with the clear-headedness that occasionally cut through his dementia fog. Okay, he said aloud. I'm here. Marcus isn't coming back anytime soon. So I need to survive. He inventoried what he had. 6 bottles of water, 8 cans of food, beans, soup, a can opener, a flashlight with batteries, his medications, enough for maybe 5 days, his duffel bag with clothes, the sleeping bag in his mind, which worked sometimes. Not much. But I've survived on less. Richard spent the first day exploring the house, relearning its layout. It had been 7 years since he'd lived here, and the decay was shocking. The kitchen was destroyed, cabinets ripped out, probably by thieves looking for copper pipes. The bathroom still had a working toilet, surprisingly, though the water ran brown at first. The bedrooms upstairs were too dangerous, floors rotted through in places. But the basement. Richard had almost forgotten about the basement. He found the door, swollen with moisture but still intact. He pulled it open and shined his flashlight down the stairs. The basement had survived better than the rest of the house. It was damp and musty, but structurally sound. And it was warmer, insulated from the outside cold by being underground. I'll sleep down here, Richard decided. Warmer and safer. He moved his supplies to the basement and set up a small living area in one corner. As he arranged his things, he noticed something he'd forgotten, the old coal chute. This house had been built in the 1940s, back when homes had coal deliveries. The chute led from outside directly into the basement. The opening had been sealed decades ago, but Richard remembered something else about it. Behind the coal chute, there was a small storage space. He'd built it himself in 1987 to store valuables, a makeshift safe, essentially, hidden behind a false wall. I wonder if anything's still in there, Richard thought. He couldn't quite remember what he'd stored. His memory was fuzzy on the details. But he had nothing else to do, so he decided to investigate. The false wall was still there, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. Richard pulled away the old boards. His hands weren't as strong as they used to be, but he managed. Behind it was a small space, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. And inside were boxes. Plastic storage containers that he'd sealed and forgotten. Richard pulled out the first box and opened it. Inside were documents, old papers, files, legal documents from decades ago. He sorted through them, confused. What was all this? Then he found a folder labeled Chen Family Records. As he opened it and began reading, memories started flooding back. Memories of something he'd forgotten entirely, lost to time and declining mental acuity. His hands started shaking as he realized what he was looking at. "Oh my God," Richard whispered. "I completely forgot about this." The documents told a story Richard had buried in his memory. In 1985, when Richard bought this house for $45,000, he'd used money saved from his jobs. But he'd also received an unexpected windfall, $50,000 from a class-action lawsuit settlement. The lawsuit was against a company that had discriminated against Chinese-American workers in the 1970s. Richard had been one of thousands of plaintiffs. The settlement had taken years, and by the time he received the money in 1985, he'd almost forgotten about it. He'd used $45,000 to buy the house. The remaining $5,000 he'd invested. But here's what Richard had completely forgotten. He hadn't just invested it in a regular account. His friend Tom, who worked in finance, had advised him to buy stock in a little startup computer company. "It's a gamble," Tom had said. "But this company, Apple Computer, might be big someday." In 1985, Richard had bought $5,000 worth of Apple stock. Then he'd filed the documents away in his hidden storage and forgotten about it. Life had gotten busy. His wife got sick. He was raising kids. The stock certificates sat untouched in the basement. Now, 38 years later, Richard was looking at those stock certificates. His hands trembled as he did the mental math. $5,000 in Apple stock in 1985. With splits and growth. He couldn't calculate it exactly. His dementia made complex math difficult. But even with his foggy mind, he knew that stock would be worth a fortune now. The second box contained more surprises. There were savings bonds, dozens of them, purchased throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Small denominations, $50, $100, but they'd been maturing for decades. There were old coins, collections Richard's father had passed down, which Richard had stored and forgotten. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in cloth, his wife Susan's jewelry. Not expensive when she was alive, but some of the pieces were antique, potentially valuable now. Richard sat surrounded by these forgotten treasures in the basement of his condemned house, and laughed. It was a broken, slightly hysterical laugh. "I've been sleeping on a fortune," he said to the empty basement. "All these years. Through all the struggles, all the times I scraped by, it was here. I just forgot." But then the laughter turned to tears. "And Marcus doesn't know. He thinks I'm worthless. A burden with nothing to offer. He abandoned me here thinking I'm just a demented old man with no value." Richard held the Apple stock certificates, now likely worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and made a decision. Marcus needs to know what he threw away. But there was a problem. Richard was trapped in a condemned house with no electricity, no phone, no way to contact anyone. Even if he wanted to tell Marcus, how could he? He needed to get out. Needed to get these documents authenticated and valued. Needed to show his son that the father he abandoned wasn't worthless after all. But Richard was 78, with limited mobility and dementia. Walking to civilization, which was at least 3 miles away through an industrial area, seemed impossible. Still, he had to try. The next morning, his third day in the house, Richard packed the most important documents in his duffel bag. He ate one of his remaining cans of food, took his medications, and prepared to walk. 3 miles. I can do 3 miles. He left the condemned house and started walking down the abandoned street. He made it 1 block before his legs gave out. The diabetes and lack of proper food had weakened him more than he realized. He sat on the curb, frustrated, knowing he couldn't make it. "I'm so close," he thought, clutching the bag with documents worth a fortune. "I found something valuable, but I'm too weak to do anything about it." That's when he heard the car. A truck pulled up, a contractor's pickup. A man in his 30s leaned out. "Hey, old-timer. You okay?" I need help," Richard said. "I'm trying to get to downtown Portland. I have important documents that need to be authenticated." The contractor, his name was Jake, looked at the disheveled old man with suspicion. "You live around here?" "I'm staying at that house." Richard pointed back at the condemned building. "That place. That's condemned. No one lives there." "I know. It's complicated. But please, I need to get downtown. I have something valuable. I just need help." Jake studied Richard, clearly debating. Then, "All right. I'll give you a ride. But if you try anything weird, I'm calling the cops." "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Richard climbed into the truck, he clutched his duffel bag tightly. Inside were documents that could change everything. Meanwhile, Marcus was at his office in downtown Portland, completely unaware that his father, the man he'd abandoned 3 days ago, was about to walk into a bank and discover he was sitting on a fortune. A fortune Marcus had thrown away. And when Marcus found out, the shame and regret would be crushing. Because some lessons cost more than money. They cost your soul. Jake dropped Richard off at a Bank of America branch in downtown Portland. "You sure you're okay, old-timer?" Jake asked, still looking concerned. "I am now. Thank you for the ride. You may have saved my life." "What's in the bag?" "You kept holding it like it's full of gold." "Something like that," Richard said with a small smile. Inside the bank, Richard approached a customer service representative, very aware of how he looked. Disheveled, unshaven, clothes dirty from 3 days in the condemned house. "I need to speak with someone about authenticating some financial documents," Richard said. "Stock certificates and savings bonds from the 1980s. The representative looked skeptical but called over a manager. The manager, a woman named Patricia Torres, was professional but cautious. "Sir, what exactly do you have?" Richard opened his duffel bag and carefully pulled out the documents, protected in plastic sleeves. Patricia's eyes widened as she examined them. "These are original Apple Incorporated stock certificates from 1985. And these savings bonds, sir, where did you get these?" "They're mine. I bought them decades ago and forgot about them." "Forgot about them?" "I have dementia. My memory isn't good. I only rediscovered them 3 days ago." Patricia's skepticism evaporated, replaced by professional focus. "Sir, if these are authentic, and they appear to be, they're worth a substantial amount. Let me get our securities specialist." Over the next 2 hours, Richard sat in a conference room while bank specialists examined his documents. The Apple stock certificates were authenticated using serial numbers and verification with Apple's transfer agent. The calculation was complex, accounting for multiple stock splits since 1985. Finally, Patricia sat down across from Richard with a number. "Mr. Chen, your original $5,000 investment in Apple stock in 1985, accounting for all splits and current market value, is worth approximately $1.8 million. Richard's breath caught. 1.8 million? Yes, sir. And the savings bonds, fully matured, are worth about $45,000. The coins will need separate appraisal, but conservatively, they might be worth $10,000 to $20,000. So, in total, you're looking at approximately $1.9 million in assets. Possibly more, depending on the coin collection and jewelry. Richard sat in stunned silence. He'd been abandoned in a condemned house, treated like worthless trash by his own son. And the whole time, he'd been sitting on nearly $2 million. Mr. Chen, are you all right? Patricia asked gently. I need to make a phone call, Richard said. I need to call my son. Marcus was in a meeting when his cell phone rang. He almost didn't answer, unknown number, but something made him pick up. Hello, Marcus. It's your father. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. It had been 3 days since he'd abandoned his father. 3 days he'd spent trying not to think about it. Dad, where are you? How are you calling? I'm at Bank of America downtown. Marcus, I need you to come here. Now. I'm at work. Marcus. Richard's voice was sharp, clearer than Marcus had heard it in months. I'm at the bank. Come now. This is important. Something in his father's tone made Marcus obey. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Marcus arrived at the bank, he found his father in a conference room with bank personnel, looking small but somehow different. More present. More solid. Dad, what's going on? Are you okay? Sit down, Marcus. Marcus sat, confused. Richard pushed a folder across the table. Open it. Inside were the authenticated documents and a valuation statement. Marcus read it once. Then again. Then looked at his father in shock. This says you have $1.9 million in assets. That's correct. But how? You never told me. I forgot. Literally forgot. I bought Apple stock in 1985 and stored the certificates in the basement of our old house. The dementia made me forget it existed. Until 3 days ago, when you abandoned me in that house, and I had nothing to do but explore. The words abandoned me hit Marcus like a physical blow. So while I was freezing in that condemned house, Richard continued, his voice steady, sleeping on a floor, wondering if I would survive, I discovered that I'm a millionaire. That the worthless burden you threw away is worth almost $2 million. Marcus felt his face flush with shame. Dad, let me finish. For 3 days, I survived in that house. Do you know what I ate? Canned beans. Cold. Because there's no electricity. Do you know where I slept? In the basement, because it was warmer than upstairs. Do you know what I thought about? Whether my son was going to come back, or if he'd left me there to die. I was going to come back. When? After I died of exposure? After someone found my body. Richard's voice was rising now, anger cutting through. You abandoned your father in a condemned house, Marcus. Your father who raised you, who worked 2 jobs to send you to college, who sacrificed everything for you. You left me to die because I was inconvenient. Patricia and the other bank employees looked deeply uncomfortable but didn't leave. And now, Richard continued, now you're sitting here looking at documents that say I'm worth $1.9 million. And I can see it in your eyes, you're thinking about that money. about what it could do for you. That's not. Don't lie to me. I can see it. But Marcus, here's what you need to understand. This money? You're not getting a penny of it. The words hung in the air. What? You heard me. I'm going to spend it on myself. On proper care. On living comfortably for whatever years I have left. And when I die, it's going to charity. You get nothing. Dad, please. Why should you get anything? You threw me away when you thought I was worthless. You don't get to claim me now that I'm valuable. That's not how it works. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. I made a mistake. I was desperate. Jennifer was leaving. I couldn't afford assisted living. I didn't know what else to do. You could have talked to me. You could have been honest. You could have done literally anything except abandon me in a condemned house like garbage. I'm sorry. Dad, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back those 3 days. Sorry doesn't erase the fear and cold and humiliation. Patricia gently interrupted. Mr. Chen, the elder Mr. Chen, we should discuss setting up your accounts and getting you proper housing immediately. Yes, Richard said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. I'll need that. Dad, please. Let me help. Let me make this right. How? By taking me to a nice assisted living facility now that you know I can pay for it? That's not making it right. That's just opportunism. No, I mean, I want to take care of you. Not because of the money, but because you're my father and I was wrong. You had 3 days to come back for me. 3 days to regret your decision and rescue me from that house. You didn't come. If I hadn't found these documents, if I hadn't gotten lucky that a contractor gave me a ride downtown, I'd still be there. Or dead. Marcus had no response. It was all true. Richard turned to Patricia. Can you recommend a good elder law attorney? I need to set up my affairs properly. Absolutely. I can make some calls right now. And I'll need a hotel room for tonight. Somewhere safe and warm. We can help arrange that. Richard stood up, gathering his documents. Marcus, you can go. I have nothing more to say to you. Dad, please. Go. Marcus stood there, watching his father turn away from him. The shame was crushing. Not just because he'd lost out on $1.9 million, though that stung, but because he'd revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person he'd never wanted to be. A person who valued convenience over family. Who saw his own father as a burden instead of a human being. A person who abandoned his father to die and only cared when he found out the father was rich. Marcus left the bank and sat in his car for an hour, crying. He'd thrown away something infinitely more valuable than money. He'd thrown away his integrity, his humanity, his father's love. And no amount of apology could buy those back. That night, Richard checked into a nice hotel, the first comfortable bed he'd slept in for months. As he lay there, clean and warm and safe, he thought about Marcus. Part of him, a small part, felt bad for being so harsh. But a larger part knew it was necessary. He needs to understand, Richard thought, that people aren't disposable. That you can't just throw away your family when they become inconvenient. Richard fell asleep in comfort, knowing that for the first time in years, his future was secure. Meanwhile, Marcus went home and told Jennifer everything. About abandoning his father. About the $1.9 million. About being cut out completely. Jennifer was horrified. You left your father in a condemned house? I was desperate. That's not desperate. That's cruel. Marcus, what have you become? The question haunted Marcus as he lay awake that night. What had he become? And was there any way to become someone better? Richard Chen had moved into a luxury senior living community in Portland, not one of the grim, underfunded facilities Marcus had looked at, but a genuinely nice place with proper care, activities, and dignity. His $1.9 million was properly invested. He had round-the-clock medical care. His medications were managed. He had his own apartment with a view of the river. He ate good food, attended social events, and even started playing chess again, something he hadn't done in years. This is what I deserved all along, Richard told his new care coordinator. Not a condemned house. Not abandonment. This. The story had leaked to local media. Abandoned senior discovers fortune in condemned house, and Richard became a minor celebrity. Reporters wanted interviews. Elder care advocates wanted him to speak about his experience. Richard agreed to one interview with the Oregonian. My son abandoned me in a condemned house because he saw me as a burden, Richard told the reporter. He never asked if I had resources. Never investigated if there were other options. He just threw me away. And then, when he discovered I was wealthy, suddenly he wanted back in my life. That's not love. That's opportunism. The article was damning. It didn't name Marcus specifically, but in Portland's tech community, people figured it out quickly. Marcus's life was imploding. His colleagues at work had seen the article. Everyone knew. The whispers followed him everywhere. That's the guy who abandoned his father. Can you believe it? What kind of person does that? His boss called him into the office. Marcus, I need to ask you directly. Did you abandon your elderly father in a condemned property? Marcus couldn't lie. Yes. But it's more complicated. I don't care how complicated it is. This company has values. We can't have someone in leadership who treats family like that. You're being placed on administrative leave, pending review. Jennifer had taken the kids to her mother's house. I need time to think about whether I can stay married to someone capable of what you did, she told him. His sister Rachel had finally called, not to support him, but to scream at him. How could you do that to Dad? I'm on the other side of the country, but even I wouldn't have abandoned him in a condemned house. What is wrong with you? Where were you when I needed help? Marcus had shot back. I was dealing with Dad alone for 3 years while you did nothing. That doesn't justify what you did. And now he has money and you're cut out? Good. You deserve it. Marcus sat alone in his house, which suddenly felt empty and cold, and forced himself to confront uncomfortable truths. The truth was, Rachel was right. What he'd done was indefensible. He'd told himself it was necessity, that he had no choice. But that was a lie. He'd had choices. He just didn't want to make the hard ones. He could have talked honestly with his father about finances. Could have investigated whether Richard had any hidden resources. Could have asked the elder law attorneys about options he hadn't considered. Instead, he'd taken the path of least resistance, make the problem disappear. And in doing so, he'd revealed who he really was. I became the villain in my own life, Marcus realized. And I didn't even notice until it was too late. 2 weeks after the discovery, Marcus did something he should have done weeks ago. He went to therapy. Dr. Sarah Kim, a therapist specializing in family dynamics and moral injury, listened to his story without judgment. I threw away my father, Marcus told her. And when I found out he was rich, I wanted back in. What does that make me? What do you think it makes you? A terrible person. A hypocrite. Someone who only values people for what they can give me. Is that who you want to be? No. God, no. But I don't know how to fix this. My dad won't talk to me. My wife is considering leaving. My job is in jeopardy. Everything is falling apart. Marcus, let me ask you something. Are you upset because of the consequences, or because you genuinely understand that what you did was wrong? Marcus thought carefully. At first, it was the consequences. I was upset I got caught. Upset I lost the money. But now I think I understand what I did. I threw away my father. Not just his comfort or dignity. I threw away my own humanity in the process. That's good insight. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Dad won't see me. And honestly, why should he? Maybe he shouldn't. Maybe you don't deserve his forgiveness. But Marcus, the work isn't about earning forgiveness. It's about becoming someone who wouldn't make that choice again. 1 month after the discovery, Richard was thriving in his new life. The structure and care had actually improved his dementia symptoms. Proper medication management, nutrition, and mental stimulation were helping him stay clearer more often. He'd started volunteering with an elder advocacy group, sharing his story to help others avoid abandonment and financial exploitation. The system failed me, Richard told audiences. But more than that, my own family failed me. We need to do better. Elders aren't burdens, we're human beings who deserve dignity. But privately, Richard struggled with his feelings about Marcus. He was angry, rightfully so. But he was also sad. Marcus had been a good kid once. What had happened to turn him into someone who could abandon his own father? I blame myself partly, Richard told his therapist. Yes, the nice facility had therapy services. Maybe I put too much pressure on him. Maybe I should have been more open about my struggles instead of trying to be strong all the time. Do you think that justifies what he did? No. But I'm trying to understand it. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving, Richard. You're allowed to be angry. I am angry. But I'm also tired. And I'm running out of time. I'm 78 with dementia. However many years I have left, do I want to spend them angry at my son? 2 months after the discovery, Marcus had lost his job. Not officially fired, but mutually agreed to part ways, which meant the same thing. Jennifer had filed for separation. Not divorce yet, but she'd made it clear, I need to see real change, Marcus. Not just apologies, but actual transformation of who you are. Marcus had nothing but time now. Time to think. Time to reflect. Time to really examine what he'd become. He volunteered at a homeless shelter. He started attending elder care facilities, not the one his father was at, but others, just sitting with lonely seniors who had no visitors. Why are you here? One old man asked him. Because I abandoned my father, Marcus said honestly. And I'm trying to understand what I did. To become someone who would never do that again. Will your father forgive you? I don't know. Maybe not. But I'm not doing this to earn forgiveness. I'm doing it because it's right. 3 months after the discovery, Richard received a letter. Not from Marcus directly, but from Dr. Kim, Marcus's therapist. Mr. Chen, I'm writing with Marcus's permission. I'm not asking you to forgive him or have contact with him. But I wanted you to know, your son is doing real work. He's in therapy 3 times a week. He's volunteering with seniors. He's facing what he did without excuses. This letter isn't to manipulate you. It's just information. What you do with it is entirely your choice. Richard read the letter several times. Part of him didn't care. Too little, too late, that part said. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, felt something like hope. 4 months after the discovery, Marcus saw his father unexpectedly at a fundraiser for elder care rights. They locked eyes across the room. Marcus's instinct was to approach, but he stopped himself. He doesn't want to talk to you, Marcus reminded himself. Respect that. But Richard, after a long moment, walked over. Hello, Marcus. Dad. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm on the board now. We're raising money for emergency elder care services, so families don't reach the breaking point like ours did. That's good work. They stood in awkward silence. Finally, Richard said, I heard you're volunteering. Sitting with seniors. I am. Not to. I'm not doing it to impress you or earn forgiveness. I'm doing it because I need to understand. To be better. Are you better? Marcus considered. I don't know. I'm trying. I don't think I'll ever stop feeling ashamed of what I did. But I'm trying to use that shame constructively instead of just drowning in it. Richard studied his son. He looked different, thinner, older somehow, but also more present. I'm not ready to forgive you, Richard said. I don't know if I ever will be. What you did was unforgivable. I know. But... Richard paused. But I'm willing to have coffee. Once. To talk. Not to reconcile, but just to talk. Marcus felt tears forming. I'd like that. Thank you. Don't thank me. This isn't generosity. This is me trying to find peace before I die. And maybe understanding why my son became capable of what he did is part of that. When? I'll have my care coordinator contact you. Richard walked away, leaving Marcus standing there. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. A crack in the wall. And for now, that was enough. The coffee shop was neutral territory, not near Richard's senior facility, not near Marcus's apartment, just a quiet place in downtown Portland with good pastries and private booths. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, nervous. He'd rehearsed what to say 100 times, but now, waiting, everything felt inadequate. Richard arrived exactly on time, assisted by his care coordinator, Helen, who settled him at the booth and then moved to a nearby table to give them privacy while remaining available if needed. Dad. Marcus stood. Marcus. Sit. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. I'm going to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. Can you do that? Yes. Why did you abandon me? The real reason. Not the excuses about Jennifer or money or stress. The real, core reason. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment. Truth or nothing. Because I stopped seeing you as a person, Marcus said quietly. Somewhere in those 3 years of caregiving, you stopped being Dad and became the problem. A burden I had to manage. An obstacle to my happiness. And when you're not a person anymore, when you're just a problem, abandoning you becomes thinkable. Keep going. I was exhausted. Resentful. Every time you forgot something or needed help, I felt this anger building. Why couldn't you just be okay? Why did you have to need so much? And that's when I knew I was in trouble, when I started blaming you for being sick, for being old, for being human. Richard listened, his face unreadable. And then Jennifer gave me the ultimatum, Marcus continued. And I had a choice, fight for you, or choose the easier path. I chose easier. I told myself it was necessary, temporary, that I'd come back. But, truthfully, I wanted you gone. Out of my life. Out of my responsibility. And the condemned house was the only way I could make that happen without admitting what I was doing. You wanted me dead. Marcus flinched but didn't deny it. Not consciously, but subconsciously. Maybe, if you died in that house, my problem would have been solved. I'm so ashamed to admit that, but yes, some part of me wanted that. Thank you for being honest. Dad, let me talk now. Richard leaned forward. What you did is unforgivable. You're right to be ashamed. You should carry that shame for the rest of your life. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not blameless in how we got here. Marcus looked up, surprised. After your mother died, I became obsessed with being strong, Richard said. I never wanted to burden you kids. Never asked for help. Never showed weakness. I thought I was being a good father, being self-sufficient. But what I actually did was teach you that needing help makes you worthless. That being vulnerable is shameful. That's not. Yes, it is. I modeled self-sufficiency to the point of isolation. And when I got sick and finally needed help, you had no framework for how to provide it. Because I never taught you. I never showed you that caring for the vulnerable is part of being human. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. You're making excuses for me. No. I'm examining my own failures. You made your choices. You own them. But I contributed to an environment where those choices became possible. They sat in silence for a moment. The money, Marcus finally said. The $1.9 million. I need you to know, I don't want it. I'm not here because of that. I know. You do. Helen has been watching you for months. The volunteering. The therapy. You're not doing it for show. You're doing it at random facilities where no one knows who you are. You're not trying to impress me. You're actually doing the work. It doesn't undo what I did. No. Nothing can. But it means you're not the same person who abandoned me. And that matters. They talked for 2 hours. About the past. About the 3 years of caregiving that led to the breaking point. About the 3 days in the condemned house, what Richard had felt, feared, experienced. I thought you'd left me there to die, Richard said. And I was angry, yes, but also heartbroken that the child I raised, who I loved more than anything, could do that to me. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know you are. But Marcus, sorry isn't enough. Sorry is just words. The question is, who are you going to be going forward? I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. Let me help you. Richard pulled out a folder. I've been working with my lawyers. I'm setting up a foundation, the Chen Family Foundation for Elder Care. It will fund emergency services for families in crisis. Provide financial assistance so families don't reach the breaking point we did. That's wonderful. I want you to run it. Marcus stared. What? Not now. Not yet. You're not ready. But in a year or two, if you continue the work you're doing, if you continue to change and grow, I want you to run it. To take your worst mistake and turn it into something that helps thousands of people. Dad, I don't deserve. This isn't about deserving. This is about transformation. You can spend the rest of your life drowning in shame, or you can use that shame as fuel to do better. To be better. To help others avoid what we went through. Marcus couldn't speak. He just cried. But Marcus, hear me clearly, this is conditional. If you backslide, if you stop doing the work, if you become that person again, you're out. The foundation will go to someone else. This is your one chance at redemption, but you have to earn it. Every single day. I will. I swear I will. They finished their coffee. As they stood to leave, Richard did something unexpected. He hugged Marcus. It was brief. Awkward. But it was real. This doesn't mean we're okay, Richard said. We're not. I'm still angry. Still hurt. But I'm willing to try. To see if we can build something new from the wreckage. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. Don't waste it. As Richard left with Helen, Marcus sat back down, overwhelmed. He'd come to this coffee meeting expecting nothing, hoping for maybe a few words of acknowledgement. Instead, his father had given him something infinitely more valuable. A purpose. A path forward. A way to transform his worst act into something meaningful. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was grace. And grace, Marcus was learning, was more powerful than forgiveness ever could be. 6 months after the discovery, Marcus started taking classes in nonprofit management and elder care advocacy. He continued his therapy and volunteer work. He attended every board meeting of his father's foundation as an observer, learning. Jennifer agreed to marriage counseling. I'm not promising anything, she told him. But I'm willing to see if you've really changed. His kids, who'd been shielded from the worst details but knew something bad had happened, slowly started talking to him again. Daddy, why don't we see Grandpa anymore? His daughter Emma asked. Because Daddy made a very big mistake, Marcus told her honestly. I hurt Grandpa badly. And now I'm trying to make it right, but it takes time. Will Grandpa forgive you? I don't know, sweetheart. But whether he does or not, I have to keep being better. Because that's what we do when we make mistakes. We learn from them and change. It was a lesson Marcus was teaching his children through his own painful transformation. And maybe, in some way, that made the pain worth it. The condemned house where Richard had been abandoned was demolished by the city 6 months after the discovery. Marcus went to watch it come down. As the wrecking ball smashed through the walls, reducing his childhood home to rubble, he thought about everything that had happened there. His childhood memories. His mother's death. His father's years of hard work. And finally, his own worst act, abandoning his father to die in that very house. But also, his father's rediscovery of a fortune. The catalyst that forced Marcus to confront who he'd become. That house took everything from us, Marcus thought. But it also gave us a chance to rebuild. As the last wall fell, Marcus whispered, "Thank you. And I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked away. Toward a future he was determined to earn. One day at a time.